is the Oval Office in the sky.
I think Air Force One is a symbol of the United States.
When we boarded the aircraft, it was as though we were home again.
It is an airplane whose manifest of passengers is not widely distributed.
It's not a luxury palace. It's a working place.
Planning a presidential trip, I think, is like a moonshot.
One occasion that does come to mind is when I got fired at 40,000 feet.
As of the word God, we ceased being Air Force One.
I think it's one of the things they really hate giving up when they have to leave the White House.
It also has a tremendous impact wherever it goes.
General Graham came back and said, "Sir, the pilots are not aboard." He says, "Tell them to take off without them."
So my first instinct was, this may be part of a great conspiracy.
It's kind of your private turf.
Theodore Roosevelt was 51 years old and just 19 months out of office when he became the first former American president to leave the ground in a heavier-than-air machine. The date, October the 11th, 1910. The place, Kenlock Field, St. Louis, Missouri. The airplane, a Wright Type B pusher biplane. It was just 7 years since man's first powered flight. But Teddy Roosevelt's 3-minute airplane ride was just an interesting footnote. This is Jimmy Stewart, and as some of you may know, aviation and its history have always held kind of a special interest for me. The real beginning of presidential flight takes us forward to the year 1943. It was exactly a year and a month from the day America entered World War II.
At this West African port fronting the Atlantic Ocean arrives President Roosevelt for his conference with Prime Minister Churchill. He drives in a scout car after having flown across the ocean. It is the first time that he has flown since becoming American president, and he is the only president to travel in a plane while in office. On the grounds of the president's villa, soldiers are stationed. A vigilant guard protects president and prime minister. And in the air, squadrons of planes, lest the enemy try an air raid.
It was a cold January the 7th in Manhattan when Pan American pilots Howard Cohn and Richard Vinell got word that something important was about to happen. From Washington, the Navy Department directed that 2 of Pan Am's mammoth transoceanic clippers be readied for an undisclosed mission. Late that day, Cohn and Vinell gunned the 2 huge flying boats across Bowery Bay. They had been ordered to fly from New York's LaGuardia Marine Terminal to Dinner Key, Miami, Florida. It was 1,000 miles, nearly 8 hours away. Arriving early the next morning at Pan Am's Biscayne Clipper Center, both pilots were told to prepare for a dawn departure on the 11th. The passenger manifest given them was puzzling. It was a dozen days later that Mrs. Cohen learned who was aboard.
It was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, dark in January, and he went down to the airplane and signed the papers that had to be signed, and he noticed that passenger list was headed by a name Mr. Jones, and the second name was Admiral Leahy and Harry Hopkins and other dignitaries, and it was just at that moment that Howard realized he was carrying somebody especially special. And he looked up at the dispatcher and said, when he saw this Mr. Jones, "No." And the man said, then he realized he was carrying President Roosevelt on his first flight in office.
The contrast between presidential air travel then and now is impressive. The straight line distance between Washington and Casablanca is 3,875 nautical miles. A modern jetliner could have made the trip in just 7 hours. In 1943, limited range, slower speeds, and the lack of sophisticated navigational aids made flying far less comfortable and convenient. FDR's flight required 4 legs of flying, 3 stopovers, a change of planes, and 3 full days of travel each way. In addition, the routing touched 3 continents, crossed the equator 4 times, and took nearly 90 hours in the air, which included the president's 61st birthday celebration. When you include round-trip rail transportation from Washington to Miami, Roosevelt covered some 17,000 miles before he was once more back in the White House. From 1943 to the present, the presidential aircraft has evolved from piston power to fan jet. Just weeks after Roosevelt's Casablanca flight, the Army Air Corps brass reached an important decision. They would provide a custom-tailored airplane with the special mission of flying the president. Their choice, the C-87A Liberator Express. The newly selected pilot was Major Henry Myers. Hank, who had most recently flown a general notorious for changing his destinations in flight, quickly christened the plane, guess where to? But concerns voiced by the Secret Service kept Roosevelt from ever flying aboard the aircraft. In the fall of 1943, a Douglas C-54 was built and customized for presidential duty. This aircraft became world-renowned. Its name, never official, was bestowed by an irreverent White House press corps. It was known simply as Sacred Cow. For a short time, Cow also served Harry Truman. Soon, though, a custom Douglas DC-6 with a spectacular eagle paint job became the president's plane. In honor of Truman's Missouri hometown, it was dubbed the Independence. When Republican Dwight Eisenhower swept into the White House, a Democrat's plane simply would not do. For Special Air Missions, SAM for short, he selected a Lockheed Constellation. He named it for the flower of wife Mamie's home state, Colorado, Columbine 2. Soon, a Lockheed Super Constellation, developed for commercial air travel, became Ike's final presidential plane. Mamie herself christened it Columbine 3. In mid-1959, SAM acquired 3 identical Boeing 707 jets. These were affixed with military air transport service markings and splashed with day-glow orange. Eisenhower used these 3 interchangeably while retaining Columbine 3 as his official presidential aircraft. With John Kennedy, presidential air travel officially entered the jet age. In late 1962, SAM took delivery of a Boeing 707 intercontinental jet. His tail number, 26,000. Raymond Loewy gave this handsome plane a striking new exterior design. It captured perfectly a strong, tasteful sense of national purpose and the American presidency. Following the tragedy in Dallas, 26,000 became Lyndon Johnson's plane. 3 different commanders served our globe-trotting 36th president, Jim Swindle, Jim Cross, and Paul Thornhill. 26,000 became Richard Nixon's Air Force One. After 10 years of service, it was replaced by a newer 707, SAM 27,000. In anticipation of the upcoming bicentennial, Nixon named each the Spirit of 76. Since then, SAM 27,000 with 26,000 as backup has served 3 additional presidents: Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan. What will the next Air Force One be like? Well, a clue certainly exists in the giant wide-bodied 767, the DC-10, and 747 SP. Each of these aircraft is more than twice the size of SAM 27,000. FDR opened the era of presidential flight. Harry Truman established it. The men who flew Truman remember him, flight attendant Bob Hughes.
Normally when we flew, there was a press plane always went with us carrying some White House people, some Secret Service people, and
additional press people. And always they wanted to get down. We would have to circle most of the time before we'd land so they could get in first. And let the photographers and everybody get off and take pictures of him coming off the airplane. So remember one time we were going to Key West for 2 or 3 weeks, and we got down there and he talked to Colonel Myers and he said, Hank, let's just go straight in this time. He says, we'll play a little joke on those guys. So we landed first, and he got a pad and pencil and went down the steps and went over to the press plane when I landed, and he stood at the bottom and jokingly interviewed the press guys coming off the airplane, and they all got a big kick out of it.
Truman loved practical jokes. Daughter Margaret Truman Daniel remembered, especially a Sunday in May 1946. Father decided at the last minute to fly to Independence to visit his ailing mother. What are you two planning, he asked. Our mother and I told him that we were going up on the roof and watch an air show of new jet fighters. He gave us one of those secret, mischievous smiles of his, and then he said, why don't you both just stay up there a while? A little later, as Mother and I were watching the jet show, we heard this roar of engines. We both turned in time to see a big silver plane cross the south lawn and flash by the east wing of the White House. And startled, I thought I could see my father in the plane's window, so I waved. I'm rather sure he waved back. After the plane climbed away, Mother turned to me and said sternly, now that's dangerous. Eisenhower preferred flying to all other modes of travel, and in fact was the first American president to be a pilot in his own right. If Ike was completely at home in the air, the same was not true for Mamie. First Officer Bill Thomas and Steward Bob Hughes.
I guess at best you'd describe Mrs. Eisenhower as a timid air traveler, because she did not like to fly without the president.
Any weather we saw or encountered en route always bothered her, and she would always call one of us back there, one of the stewards, and say, would you go up front and make sure Bill Draper knows that those things are there out there, those clouds and those thunderstorms?
We might not even have considered it, but she'd have a little note up there asking about that big thunderstorm or that big black area over there, and we'd have to come back with a comment that we're not going that way.
It was early in the Eisenhower administration aboard Columbine II when an incident occurred that would change forever the call sign of an airplane carrying the President of the United States. Taking off from Washington and climbing to 10,000 feet over a certain checkpoint, Columbine called in on a new radio frequency as instructed. Roger 610 answered the controller, and 10 seconds later, another plane's transmission was heard. Center, are you calling Eastern 610? Negative was the reply. We're calling Air Force 610. This in-flight confusion could have been dangerous. First Officer Bill Thomas.
Well, when we got back, Bill Draper got with the Air Force operations people and with the Federal Aviation Agency and cited this as a reason why we needed a more positive control system. And he recommended that we use Air Force One for the call sign of an airplane when it had the president on board.
Jerry Parr, Assistant Director, Protective Research, U.S. Secret Service.
The code names are delivered to the Secret Service, a number of code names, and the Secret Service chooses those names on the basis of probably some personal attribute of the person that we protect. For example, with Vice President Humphrey in the mid-60s, his code name was Lightning, which certainly fitted his energetic character, his activism. But basically, that's the way we do it.
Through the years, call signs and code names have performed important functions. These specify not only the President, the First Lady, and their children, but also key members of respective administrations, other people, places, and things. Some examples. Volunteer, Lyndon Johnson. Passkey, Gerald Ford. Searchlight, Richard Nixon. Deacon, Jimmy Carter. Victoria, Mrs. Johnson. Lace, Jackie Kennedy. Dancer, Mrs. Carter. Pinafore, Mrs. Ford. Providence, Ike Eisenhower. Angel, Air Force One. Supervise, Harry Truman. Flag Day, Tip O'Neill. Woodcutter, Henry Kissinger. In the summer of 1959, Sam accepted delivery of 3 new Boeing 707 executive jet aircraft. Eisenhower's unprecedented 11-nation tour started December 4th. For Eisenhower, it was a stunning whirlwind tour. In late June of 1963, President John Kennedy embarked on his memorable journey to Berlin. His military aide, Major General Ted Clifton.
It was probably one of the most important diplomatic occasions that occurred in his presidency. It was very important that the Germans be assured and reassured of our faith in them, and it was all planned throughout so that he would bring Germany together as well as bringing us together. And as you know, Chancellor Adenauer and Willy Brandt, who was the mayor of Berlin, were political competitors. And Willy Brandt was working to be the next chancellor. And so we had to handle that very carefully. And again, the president used Air Force One to accomplish something. He just suggested that they both ride with him to West Berlin. And Willy Brandt knew that he would get off the airplane with the president, which was good for him politically. Adenauer also knew that as the incumbent chancellor, he wasn't being shut out of the game. And Air Force One performed a very important diplomatic mission.
There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them Berlin.
White House correspondent Frank Cormier.
Well, I never saw crowds, I don't think, anywhere in one day as we saw in West Berlin. I suspect 6/5 of the population must have been in the street. It was just enormous. And when he gave that famous speech, and I won't try the German,
President Kennedy had a special way of masking a personal habit he indulged in aboard Air Force One. Colonel Joe Soffit explains.
President Kennedy was fond of cigars, and generally he had a cigar in his mouth when he was ready to deplane from the aircraft. And while they were getting the greeting ceremony ready outside, he would usually have that cigar in his hand, and just before he stepped out of the aircraft, he put that cigar in his left pocket and would walk down the stairs, generally, with his hand in his left pocket. You understand that he had quite a few holes in those suit pockets. Why they didn't make them out of asbestos, I don't know.
Press Office Secretary Sue Vogelsinger.
And part of the problem, certainly, of working on the plane was that you were limited in your time. And he was inclined to want to change speeches at the last minute, which meant, and in many cases, one case in particular, we were flying from New York to Yale, which is a very short trip. He was giving a major economic speech and decided to rewrite it on that very brief flight. He dictated all the changes to me as we're kind of landing. No seatbelt, coffee's on the table, coffee spills on the speech, no typewriter, no nothing. The hysteria of kind of getting off the plane with what I know are major changes in a major speech and how you're going to do that. And I said to him, you know, there's not too much time to make these changes. And he said, oh, well, you'll get it done, you'll get it done. And indeed, a typewriter was set up under the stand, and the pages came out where he handed up to him as he was delivering the speech. Didn't make any terrible mistakes, thank goodness.
On the morning of November 22nd, 1963, It took Air Force One exactly 13 minutes to fly from Carswell Air Force Base, Fort Worth, to Love Field outside Dallas, Texas. It was scarcely long enough for Colonel Jim Swindle to lift Camelot's new wing above the clouds. The President and Mrs. Kennedy had come to Texas the day before to mend some political fences. Waving aside concerns about hostility in Dallas, Kennedy ordered that the bullet-resistant bubble top be removed from his limousine. In retrospect, that directive became perhaps the most tragic single order ever given by a president aboard Air Force One. The rest became a keenly etched memory for all America and the world.
Earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way towards the Trade Mart. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
In the horror and confusion that followed Kennedy's death, Aircraft 26,000 became a place of refuge and security. Before leaving Dallas with the slain president's body and Mrs. Kennedy aboard, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, elected to take the oath of office aboard Air Force One. One of these frames, captured by photographer Cecil Stoughton, became the single most reproduced photograph ever taken aboard a presidential plane. On that hushed and painful flight back to Andrews, Colonel Jim Swindle, Air Force One commander.
And it was almost eerie, quiet, because we didn't have to do much talking. We were on a direct flight. It's very simple navigation. And FAA gave us anything we wanted, and in hushed tones, everybody was just, seemed like they were saluting the president.
For 3 days, television sets across America carried unblinkingly the details of Kennedy's state funeral. There was, at the personal request of Mrs. Kennedy, a final salute from Air Force One and its crew.
She thought of us. She said, Jack loved Air Force One and flying, and said, certainly if it could be arranged, do you suppose they could do the flyover? And it was her idea, and it was said just like that.
Lyndon Johnson rode his big jet like a range boss on a cattle drive, dashing here and there around the globe, rounding up stray politicians and prime ministers, dispensing his own brand of wisdom, handing out money from the American chuck wagon, and radioing ahead for more diet root beer and Texas-ized steaks. It was not long before Lyndon Johnson began placing his very special brand not only on the American presidency, but on the president's plane. White House correspondent Frank Cormier.
The main passenger cabin forward of his was changed with all the seats reversed, so all the passengers flew backwards. And they looked through a plastic transparent wall at Johnson in what we called his throne chair, and he would be facing forward, facing his fellow passengers.
Flight engineer Joe Chappell.
The president's chair was a large Hartman aircraft seat, and it was designed and installed to fit around or in the kidney-shaped conference table that was electrically operated. We could move the president's desk in the conference area from the coffee table height to the writing desk or dining height.
LBJ also held very strong beliefs about leaders around the world.
Nikita Khrushchev had just been deposed as the premier of the Soviet Union. And Johnson, over a highball, leaned back and said, look around the world. Khrushchev's gone, Nehru's gone, Adenauer's gone, Macmillan's gone, Senye's gone. Who's left? De Gaulle? And then he leaned back and literally thumped his chest and said, I am the king.
Since the advent of the intercontinental jet, American presidents have embarked on literally dozens of remarkable journeys. Often, world events or the unpredictability of some chief executives allows little time for advanced planning. Lyndon Johnson's military aide and pilot, Jim Cross.
President Johnson called me in my office there at the White House, and he said, Jim, I want you to get my big airplane ready. We're going to have to go over and pay our last respects to Prime Minister Holt. And I said, well, Mr. President, you might remember, sir, we put that big airplane in the overhaul hangar about, 3 or 4 days ago, and you had approved its going. And in one of his very Texan-like homilies, he said, well, just run up there and get it back. Said, we're going to take that airplane. I said, Mr. President, I was up there yesterday, and I looked at the plane. It'd take at least 10 days just to put the pieces back on it. He said, well, I don't know why it is, but every time that some of you folks get to doing something, you mess up my plans. So see if you can find me another airplane, which we did. We took one of the backup planes. We fitted it out for him more or less to his liking so that we could take it. And 2 days later, we left on this particular incredible journey. We were gone just under 4 days. I think it was 121 hours. We spent 61 hours in the air, and we stopped in Honolulu. We stopped in Australia, 2 different places. We stopped in Bangkok, or near Bangkok. I believe it's Korat Air Force Base. We stopped in Karachi to see the president of Pakistan at that time. We then stopped to see the Pope on the eve of Christmas. I think it was the night of the 23rd. And we flew from there on to Lodges, and then on back into Andrews. We arrived here, as I recall, it was Christmas Eve morning, about 7 o'clock, having been gone some 121 hours.
There was a strange, little-known ending to Johnson's final flight aboard the presidential plane. Colonel Ralph Albertassi.
President Nixon had made the gesture, of course, of wanting the now former president of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, to go back to his home state in the airplane that he'd become accustomed to, Air Force One. They got to Austin, of course, and when they got there, I got a phone call. Not really a frantic phone call, but kind of a phone call of concern from Paul Thornhill. He said, Ralph, you're not going to believe this, but we've been ordered to take everything off the airplane. And when I say everything, they took the matches that had the presidential seal, they took the cigarettes that had the presidential seal, they took the tissues, the towels, the dishes that Jackie Kennedy had arranged to put on board the airplane that had special flavor and special significance to the airplane alone. All those things were gone. And the most important thing was that the conference room chair that the president used all the time, we call it the king chair, well, they took that seat off too. So the airplane came back from Austin without the king chair and all the other amenities.
So help me God.
Richard Nixon ascended to the presidency partly because of his campaign pledge that he had a secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. When Ralph Albertassi signed on as presidential pilot, he hadn't the faintest clue he was about to become one of the prime smugglers of all time. The plan came directly from President Nixon. It involved clandestine flights to Europe, where National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger was to meet secretly with the North Vietnamese. Colonel Ralph Albertassi.
Happened. He would attend some diplomatic reception or function, and he was always with some sort of an adornment called a pretty girl, and generally somebody well-known, and all of them beautiful, and he had developed a reputation for being a ladies' man as a result. But he would show up at these receptions and these things, and after a reasonable length of time making sure that everybody'd seen him, he would call for his White House car, would come up and pick him up, and they'd jump in the car, and off they would go into the night, with everybody in attendance suspecting that Henry was going out for a great weekend, you see. And he would drop the girl off at whatever place she was staying or her home and proceed to the airport, where he'd jump on the airplane and we would head off for our meeting in France or Germany or England or wherever the case may be. Then we would get back some 24 hours later, 36 hours later, and Henry would make a show at the White House on Monday morning, and all the newspaper people would see him with these bleary eyes and worn expression, and they would think, my God, what a great weekend he must have had.
But it wasn't all smooth flying. In April of 1970, an incident occurred in flight that nearly unmasked the secret negotiation and could have destroyed them forever. Enter Major General Vernon Walters, military attaché of the American Embassy in Paris.
I received a phone call about 5 o'clock, very urgent, from Secretary Haig, who indicated to me that something had gone wrong with the aircraft.
As we were going along, the engineer came up and says, you know, we're losing hydraulic fluid. I don't understand it.
And that the aircraft would have to land at some place where there was a arresting gear at the end of the runway because of the fact that it would have no flaps and no brakes.
So we made the judgment to go to Frankfurt because it's a joint-use air base. The Air Force is on one side and the civilians on the other.
So about 3 hours later, about 8 o'clock at night, 8:30, I got another phone call from him, and he said, can you land in the worst possible place, Frankfurt, Rhine-Main, where he will certainly be recognized. And the North Vietnamese had told us that if there was any publicity, they would break off the negotiations. And you've got to do something. And I said, well, I will do something. And I wondered what I would do. I sat there maybe for 10 or 15 minutes after I hung up, and finally I decided I'd walk up the street to the President of France's palace. I had just taken him around the United States about 2 or 3 months before, so I knew him a little better than the military attaché normally knows the president. So President Pompidou listened to my story, called his airplane at Villers-Coublay Airport, told me go out there, and my plane will take you to Rhine-Main and pick up Kissinger.
I then contacted the base commander in Germany, whom I knew, in this Air Force section of the airport, and told him the circumstances.
We flew eastward, a beautiful night, and soon we pulled up behind the aircraft, the Air Force One. And we followed it into Frankfurt. It landed ahead of us. I walked up into the airplane, and Dr. Kissinger was sitting there looking rather dejected. And he said, am I glad to see you? What are we going to do now? And I said, Dr. Kissinger, take off your glasses, roll up your coat collar, walk down the ladder, walk up the ladder of the small French airplane, remove your baggage and your aids. And it's the only time in my life I've ever seen a meek, obedient Henry Kissinger doing exactly as he was told. We got in and took off, and about half an hour after we took off, the French pilot, Colonel Calderon, asked me to come up front. And he said, General, what am I going to tell the Germans? I said, about what? He said, they know this is the President of France's airplane. They know that in the middle of the night, without getting a flight clearance, without filing a flight plan, we penetrated German airspace. The bells are ringing all the way from Switzerland to Denmark. The end of the story is simply this, that a couple of days later I saw the French pilot, and I said, Calderon, did the Germans come? He said, General Walters, when I got to my office the next morning, the German air attaché in uniform was waiting for me. And I said, what did you tell him? And he said, I told him what we'd agreed upon, namely that it involved a woman. And I said, did that satisfy him, or did he have any other questions? And he said, just one. I said, what was that? He said, well, he leaned forward confidentially, tapped me on the knee, and said, tell me, is President Pompidou's lady German?
For those connected with the mission, it became known simply as Cherchez La Femme. It was 11:30 a.m. local time, February 21st, 1972, when Air Force One touched down in the capital of the People's Republic of China. Richard Nixon's flight had stunned the world. Then, and for the rest of that unprecedented journey, the world at large was treated for the first time ever to live color pictures of an American president moving through the exotic sights of mainland China.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
The first presidential resignation in history. Richard Nixon's final flight as president was at hand. Colonel Albertazzi.
I suppose everything came to a head emotionally. We set the stage, the crew, for this final departure as we normally would for any trip to California, with a backup airplane and the alternate crew and those kind of things. And one of the things that we had to do, of course, was to provide for the fact that the president, somewhere along that flight, was not going to be the president anymore. We watched his presentation. We have television capability on board the airplane. We watched his final remarks to friends and employees at the White House.
I want to say for each and every one of you, not only will we always remember you, not only will we always be grateful to you, but always you will be in our hearts, and you will be in our prayers. Thank you very much.
We left Washington, D.C. Andrews Air Force Base at 10:17 in the morning. We were Air Force One.
Ford Press Secretary Jerry Terhorst.
The decision had been made by the National Security Council that on the final flight to San Clemente, the black box would not be on that plane, even though President Nixon would be president actually for almost an hour after he left the White House.
And just where was the little black box?
There's some conjecture that it was aboard the airplane. It was not.
The black box, sometimes called the football, it's the box of the codes and the encoding ciphers which accompany a president of the United States wherever he goes in this country or abroad. There's never more than an arm's length from him if he needs it in case of a nuclear attack. Because certainly when Jerry Ford became president at 12, the box should be with him and not on some airplane going west.
Chief radio operator Van Valkenburg.
It was a very quiet flight. We were instructed that Air Force One would cease being as of the time that Mr. Ford was sworn in. So I, being the chief communicator on that last flight, I called the audiovisual section in the White House. They in turn patched up one of the microphones on the podium where Mr. Ford was being sworn in into the airplane. I monitored it. I put it over the PA system throughout the airplane so the people in the back could hear it.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve...
Something like 2.5 minutes after 12, 13 miles southwest of Jefferson City, Missouri, at 39,000 feet, when Gerald Ford said,
"So help me God."
So help me God.
We ceased being Air Force One. And we immediately then changed the call sign to SAM 27,000, and we proceeded to San Clemente with that kind of a call sign rather than Air Force One.
It was obviously a dramatic moment, a silent moment. But
Press Secretary Ron Ziegler.
President Nixon handled that entire situation, I think, with great dignity. And, there was no substantial emotion that occurred, but I would say more or less reflection. But it happened on Air Force One.
Some 20-25 minutes after the swearing-in ceremony, the president came out. First time that I'd seen him after the boarding of the airplane. And as he is wont to do, and perhaps some people who know him better than I do, he had a tendency to roll his hands just a little bit. When he didn't put them in his pocket, he kind of rolled them around. And the way he looked around and looked at me, he said, "Ralph, I promised you before we went to China, when we got back, I was going to make you a general." And he said, "Like so many things that I've got to leave undone." And his voice trailed off, and I said, "I understand, Mr. President." So we got to San Clemente, he got off and made his remarks at the group gathered at El Toro.
As I step off the Spirit of 76, this great plane that took us to China, to Russia on 2 occasions, to the Mideast, this great Spirit of 76 is one that we will always remember because of those trips.
Came over, we had this picture-taking session. Once again, he said, "I'm sorry that it has to end this way." And I said, "I understand, Mr. President." He walked over to the helicopter, and I saluted and turned around to the crew, and I said, "Well, folks, it's time to get this airplane back for President Ford.
Ford Press Secretary Ron Nessa.
Some of the trips, particularly the overseas trips, really left very little time for sleep once you got to the ground. And so everybody would try to catch as much sleep as they could on Air Force One. And you've been on the plane, so you know that there's a narrow little bench. And I'd mastered the technique of sleeping on my back and not rolling off. And there's a picture somewhere of me sleeping and President Ford looking down at me. Somebody dreamed up a funny caption about my wide-awake press secretary.
For President Ford, there were occasional embarrassments connected both with Marine One, the presidential helicopter, and Air Force One. Former President Ford.
We landed in Salzburg. It was a very wet, rainy day. And as I came out of the Air Force One, I had an umbrella in one hand, and I was trying to hold Betty's arm with my other hand. And inadvertently, I tripped and took a bad spill. Fortunately, because I'd learned how to fall when I was playing football and competing in other athletics, even though I fell 3 or 4 steps, I rolled and got up and had no injuries whatsoever.
Thank you for your gracious welcome to Salzburg, and I'm sorry that I tumbled in.
After it all happened, I kidded Betty and said, why did she push me?
And when it comes to political campaigning, Air Force One is a very real plus for the sitting president.
There's quite a bit of difference, especially during a presidential election campaign, and I guess presidential election campaigns now run the whole 4 years, between a candidate who arrives in a city in this great glistening symbol of American authority and power, and the other candidate who arrives in a chartered 727. And I think all presidents try to maximize the impact of that symbol. At one point in the presidential campaign of 1976, there was the idea that Air Force One, when it was taking President Ford to some campaign stop, would make a low-level pass over the field and then turn around and land. And that is a very dramatic symbol of presidential authority, and it was to remind everybody that this was the president. The other guy was just a candidate who had to charter his plane.
On January 20, 1977, Jimmy Carter became the 39th President of the United States. Perhaps no chief executive in recent memory was more dedicated to eliminating the ostentation of the presidency. His concern stretched even to the amenities aboard Air Force One. Former President Carter.
Well, within the White House and the Oval Office, the working spaces that I occupied at Camp David on Air Force One, in my own private life as president, I tried to cut down the waste of money and the ostentatious nature of the presidency. Some of my predecessors, I say without any criticism, had given quite expensive gifts, for instance, to everyone who came on board Air Force One. Kind of like it was a mercantile establishment where people would carry away mementos quite costly to the American public. It was just contrary to my nature. And so we did away with that element of Air Force One.
Press Secretary Jody Powell.
I personally was grief-stricken when I found out that he had banned the free cigarettes from Air Force One. It seemed to me that was one of the things I was looking forward to enjoying, is a free cigarette. So when you smoke as many as I do, then it makes a big difference. But I suspect in many ways, yeah. I mean, the doing away with the limousines for the White House staff and so forth. My impression was that nobody noticed that but us.
But people could always take with them a pencil or a scratch pad or a book of paper matches, just as a proof that they had been on board the beautiful plane.
During the final year of his presidency, Jimmy Carter was deeply involved in gaining freedom for 52 Americans held hostage in Iran. Their release stretched into Ronald Reagan's inauguration. The new president asked his predecessor to fly to Europe and welcome home the former captives.
Getting those hostages home safe had been a preoccupation of the administration in which I served for over a year. It had finally happened. And I think all of us were certainly grateful to the new administration for making that trip possible, particularly possible under the circumstances in which it took place. And I remember coming back, one of the staff members had thought to purchase and have loaded on board some champagne to drink, and we were standing there in the president's cabin with a glass of champagne. And my toast was to those who had shown through their stamina and patience and courage that our nation's principles were intact. And of course, my toast also included one to freedom.
Today, when the President of the United States leaves for major travel abroad, the planning, advanced work, logistics, and detail involved almost defies description. In the Reagan White House, Mike McManus, assistant to the President, shares a little of what it's like to fly the Oval Office.
Well, I think we're probably one of the few countries in the world where the President of the United States, when he travels, takes, in effect, the White House and the Oval Office with him, because he's continuing to be the President at the time that he's away. We'll go out with a full entourage, which does about 35 to 40 people, including some press people, so that they can take a look at the technical aspects of getting this story back to the American people. And then we'll send out what we call our advance team about 2 weeks ahead of time, usually for a large foreign trip. And that will include a contingent of experts not only in advance, and that's essentially logistical planning, but also military support people, press people, communications people, security people. It gets to be quite an involved part of our planning. It really is picking up the White House and moving it someplace else in the world.
Today, many Americans are well-seasoned air travelers. And if there's a single topic of conversation over the years that seems to interest them all, it's what's the in-flight food like? In the mammoth hangars at Andrews that house both the presidential aircraft and the flight kitchens, we asked the chief steward of Air Force One a little about random selection, how the food for Air Force One is acquired and prepared. Chief Master Sergeant Charlie Palmer.
After we've coordinated the meals with the White House, our stewards get busy, and we hit a supermarket in the local area that no one knows we're coming. All of our folks are in civilian pose. If it should happen to be a wholesale product, then we go to the wholesaler, which they're all approved by the Secret Service for us to buy the product at that location. We try to anticipate where we're going, the locality, the particular time of days. Say we're going to New Orleans, we might want to have a shrimp Creole. We never go wrong if we're leaving, say, Russia, China, or some of the other countries on an extended tour, if we just go with a basic hamburger and a bowl of chili.
What's it like to fly and chat with the President? Welcome aboard Air Force One. President Ronald Reagan.
It's a better office than any I have. I can get more done on this plane. For example, I do a lot of letter writing. I have a lot of mail that I choose to answer myself. And that mail can pile up and be quite a stack. And I can get on this plane, and on a trip like this, I can come back with a tablet full and all the letters attached to it and hand it in at the office to be typed and for my signature. There is instant communications, and not only with the White House, but many times there have been international conversations on this plane and on a secure phone. I have found that, like in so many things domestically and so many things in every other part of our lives, the face-to-face, getting to know the other heads of state on a personal basis, I can actually say that we have established personal friendships with these people. And as I say, maybe you could have done it less conveniently to have such a meeting, but this has made it that much more possible.
On the flight deck, we asked presidential pilot Bob Ruddick, what's it like, this mission of flying the president?
I feel that we spend so much time together, it's not often a commander-workers relationship. We would pretty much work on the same level to get the job done. And if you could, you might say there's no star on the crew. Everybody is very down to earth. Everybody pulls together from the same level just to accomplish the mission of flying the president.
And that digital clock up there that tells you your destination, and then here they put when you're going to arrive. Now, I know it's a matter of principle and honor with them, with that crew. But this plane lands, and this plane taxis to the stopping point, and I stand here or sit here time after time watching, and those wheels, you see that tarmac stop. The wheels have stopped turning as that clock clicks to the exact minute that it said we would arrive. If I could recall for you, once when I wasn't president, and it was not an Air Force One, but planes that are not configured this way interiorly, but same type of plane with the same symbolism on the outside. While I was governor of California, I was asked to do a trip abroad, several trips abroad, on behalf of the country and the president, some errands. And I remember once during the oil boycott, and we were due from one country to another. We were in Asia, and I won't name the countries. But suddenly word came that very possibly we could not be refueled in the country to which we were going because of the boycott and their concern. And I was representing the president, but I was only a governor. But someplace, someone, diplomatic nature, suggested that, well, we could go there, but we would paint out the flag on the plane. And I, without checking with anyone, said, then we won't go to that country. And as it turned out, that country informed us they would refuel. When you're abroad and in strange lands, and you've been there and you're very busy, and then you arrive back at the airport, and your first glimpse of this plane and that flag up there, yes, it's a little bit like hearing the national anthem, and you swell a little with pride.